Become a sustaining member of the Commonwealth Club for just $10 a month. Join today.
I'd like to mention that tomorrow is International Peace Day, and to introduce our distinguished moderator for today, Ata Argandawal, who, like the rest of our panel, our distinguished panel, is a humanitarian, helps people in need, and welcomes the stranger. Ata is also the author of several books, including Lost Decency, The Untold Afghan Story. Would you please welcome Ata Argandawal?
Thank you very much, Celia. Appreciate it. Welcome, everybody, to the Commonwealth Club of California program today. I'll be your moderator for the virtual program. We are also going to invite everybody to check online with us at www.commonwealthclub.org. We are going to have a wonderful panel today, and we'll have a great discussion throughout this program. And what we are going to have after this overview and actually a slide presentation by our panelists, we are going to have a Q&A session. So please submit your questions through the chat. Now, when it comes to Afghanistan, there are obviously lots of questions, a lot of questions that the international community will deal with. But the biggest thing to really remember is as to what Afghanistan was. And it's probably a very good idea to kind of go back and review at least the 5 decades of Afghanistan's history to see where Afghanistan was once one of the most peaceful nations in the world, a darling of the tourist destination, a country that was actually a model of neutrality, a country where basically most of the West had presence, but not in the form of military or, let's say, presence, if you will. But it was all through cooperation and through project managements and through really presence that really made a difference in lives of many. So a country, again, that, from 1919 all the way through 1978 had a wonderful, peaceful time, although there were some choppy periods, of course, throughout that period of about 7 years, but nothing really close to the events that have transpired after 1979 and the invasion of Soviet Union. So the questions all around are just enormous as to what really happened. And finger pointing, as you can imagine, has started all over. And there are plenty of players and countries that we can either blame or say who is responsible for. But the reality remains that there are actually, there has been a lot of missteps, mismanagement, and actually strategic errors that have been made throughout the last 4 decades when it comes to Afghanistan. So history will, of course, write itself, and there will be questions. But one thing I can assure everybody is that Afghanistan matters, or Afghan questions are not going to go away. As today, the international community and humanity is actually pretty well aware of the events that have transpired. But more importantly, where the Afghan diaspora is now spread out and are being sent out basically through every corner of the world. So the Afghan question, again, is in everybody's mind, and it's going to be there for a very long time. And obviously, there will be lots of questions again as to what happened, how a tragedy like this can be avoided, but more importantly, maybe a big lesson for the international community as to how those narratives, such as nation building and presence, military presence, cooperation, and all of those will actually come to light as the international community grapples with the aftermath of Afghanistan. Because again, what has happened in Afghanistan, especially lately, with the jarring events that have taken place, is that something that will not only go away, but it's going to actually create a lot more questions, not only in the form of just the military withdrawal, but as to really what has transpired through the last 20 years in general. But also the ramifications in terms of humanitarian, economic, and as well as the terrorism, as to how Afghanistan is going to once again fall, or is indeed falling, unfortunately, into another safe haven back again. So the ramifications are enormous, but again, there will be lots of questions, and then we'll have opportunities for the international community to really once and for all draw some lessons, learn some lessons, and to see what can be done to save humanity and save also people of Afghanistan as the longest suffering probably population in history. I know there has been events of many around the world, and the things that we are all aware of, but I think Afghanistan's challenges certainly falls at one of the probably longest, not just the longest war, but the longest suffering nation in history. So now it's time to get our program going, and our distinguished panel are made of Humaira Gilzai, Amy Dodson, and Steve Miska. We are going to begin with Humaira Gilzai, who is the founder of Afghan Network, a cultural expert, and I believe she also blogs pretty much as far as some of the cultural areas, and also as far as food. I've seen her work. She does a terrific job. So with that, I want to welcome Humaira.
Thank you so much, Atal, for that introduction, and also for the Commonwealth Club for having this program, as many of us in the diaspora are thoroughly immersed in the Afghan news and such, and are in direct contact with all of our friends and colleagues in Afghanistan. I'm seeing that in the press, Afghanistan is starting to fall in the back pages. But before I start my presentation, I want to do a quick land acknowledgement that I'm calling from the native lands of Ramaytush Ohlone, colonially known as San Francisco. And once again, thank you for having me on this panel. I have to admit that since August 15th, my life has been really turned upside down, in the sense that many of us in the diaspora have been watching the tragedy of Afghanistan unfold with very little that we could do to help. I believe myself, even our moderator Ata, and many of the Afghan diaspora are still processing what has happened, and with fear we watch what will be unfolding ahead of us. We've all done our best to try to help our friends, colleagues, and family members get out of Afghanistan, most likely unsuccessfully, or find some safe areas to go to. However, the Afghan economy is falling apart, and there are so many other things that are affecting the Afghan people. But what I want to do is start out by just reminding everybody what happened. In April, President Biden announced that the remaining 3,000 US troops in Afghanistan would be withdrawn on September 11, 2021. At that point, the 8,000 allied troops and 18,000 contractors that Afghan forces relied upon to operate the Air Force and provide logistic support also left. So in the recent months before the soft coup, the Afghan military was unable to provide vital supplies, such as food and ammunition, to outposts scattered throughout the country. And through the soft coup, the Taliban, as we all know, very quickly took over the country, and they took over Kabul on August 15th, and the Afghan government collapsed. And that was basically the final chapter of the US withdrawal through this catastrophe. At this point, the US, Germany, Britain, Canada, Pakistan, Switzerland, and the United Nations have evacuated their nationals out of Afghanistan, and they've suspended any type of support in Afghanistan. And how was it that we thought that the Afghan army, the government, would be able to hold up against the Taliban, while we have extensive intelligence, or we claim to have extensive intelligence within the country? These are some questions that we have been asking, and many people in the diaspora as well as the press have been wondering, why did the Biden government allow this catastrophe of withdrawal to take place? We're not saying that the US should have stayed, but the withdrawal could have been in a much more orderly way. There could have been more support to help the Afghan government stay in power. Also, why didn't the US act sooner to withdraw the American assets and Afghan allies starting in May, when the September 11th withdrawal was set? Why did we allow the hard work of our servicemen and women go to waste with this terrible final chapter, where we basically, through delegitimizing the Afghan government and shaking hands with the Afghan Taliban in Doha, legitimized the Taliban government and allowed them to basically be emboldened to do this kind of work. At this point, through my personal contacts, as well as many friends and colleagues who also have contacts in Afghanistan, we are hearing that the Afghan people feel abandoned and alone, as all the development that has been made in Afghanistan in the past 20 years are unfolding right in front of us and falling apart. And the US and other countries are slowly losing interest in the Afghan tragedy and plight, pegging it as a civil war or something that needs to be handled internally within the government, while it was all really created based on external meddling. So I was asked to give a current status of Afghan people and Afghan women. And what I can tell you that the Afghan people, especially in the cities, are scared about their uncertain future. Many Afghans have been internally displaced, and many are escaping to Pakistan over the borders. And as we all know, and we'll hear from Amy, how many are trying to leave. But that's basically around 100 to 200,000 people that we're talking about who would be coming to the West. Afghanistan is a country of 40 million people. Those people will have to live under the rule of Taliban. And many of them are afraid of the reprisals that will be made against them, against educated women, against thought leaders, filmmakers, journalists, and many of the people who were educated and were in government positions and such, and advocates were able to leave Afghanistan, but many have not been able to. And I personally have mixed feelings about the departure of the educated class, because then there's brain drain in the country, and those are some of the people who really stood side by side with the US and rebuilt Afghanistan. And once they leave, then who is going to be there to resist the Taliban? Of course, I'm in a place of privilege and living in the United States, so I don't feel that that is a wrong wish, but I also fear how it would affect the future of the country. Many of the educated class, journalists, artists, are fearful and hiding, and they're in need of protection. Women and girls, especially in the cities, are concerned about their future And you may all have heard the past 3 days, boys' schools have opened, but girls' schools from grade 7 to 12th has not been reopened. And there has not been really any news of when that might happen. Also, it has been announced that women who were working are not to return to work and leave their jobs to men who can do their work. So basically, if you did a job that a man can do instead of you, then that is going to be given to a man and you are not to return to work. I just want to remind everyone that the Afghan constitution had mandated that 25% of the parliamentary seats are held by women, but the Taliban have not appointed a single woman in any type of leadership role. Currently, 2 million Afghan women are widows, and many of them are concerned that if the Taliban instilled the Mahram rule, which is that you cannot leave your home or go outside without a male chaperone, that would normally be a husband, uncle, brother, son, then you cannot be outside. If the Taliban have not really made it clear what their mandate is going to be, they're kind of skirting around this issue, but that is something that is looming on the minds of many Afghan women. And also, as another show of where things are going, the Taliban have closed the Ministry of Women's Affairs and turned the building into the Ministry of Virtue and Vice. That was the ministry that basically enforced all the rules of Taliban 1.0, that women had to be covered, men had to have a beard a certain length, and all those other draconian codes of clothing and behavior. As we all know, historically, that a country doesn't thrive economically or civically with half of its population hidden behind walls. So this uncertain future is not only terrifying, but it's exasperating a lot of the Afghan women who are basically waiting to see what happens to them. Of course, all of this humanitarian issues, as we are watching it unfold, we have to remember that Afghanistan is suffering from drought and, of course, COVID, like the rest of the world. And Afghanistan has been isolated economically when the US froze $9.5 billion of Afghan banks' assets. And when you when our government did this, who is going to suffer from this? It's not going to be the head of the Taliban. They have access to funds. It's the Afghan people who are not receiving their salaries. It's the fact that the government can't pay the duties for goods that need to be imported in Afghanistan, and all those trucks are going to be turned away. And this is causing a major economic catastrophe for Afghanistan. At this point, even Afghans who are wealthy or had money in the bank cannot access their funds because they're being held overseas. They're only allowed to withdraw $200 a week of cash, and that is basically after standing in line for a day or two. Inflation is causing the cost of flour, oil, sugar, and basic necessities of Afghan people to skyrocket. So currently the country is heading towards a winter with all these obstacles against it, and a lot of us are very concerned about what these sanctions and freezing up assets could mean to the Afghan people. I mean, we really know what it means, but what we're not sure about is what the intention is for the US. Once again, it's under the guise that we are influencing the Taliban to protect Afghan women and such, but clearly that is not working. If this is to hold the money over the Taliban so we can get intelligence from them and help the US identify any terrorist activities, then why should the Afghan people suffer from that? So, one thing I do know about the Afghan women who I've worked with in the past 18 years are that they're going to fight for their rights that were given to them under the Afghan constitution, which is in line with the rights that were given to women in Islam. So, a lot of us are scratching our heads and wondering what Islam is the Taliban following. It has that does not align at all with how other Islamic countries are treating women. Today on Twitter, I saw a tweet from Afghan woman under the Twitter handle Shola, and she said Afghan women need healthcare, education, jobs, and freedom of self-determination. They can't be kept hostage to the values of a few. Culture of fear and oppression is not governance, nor can be disguised as protection. So my hope is that Afghan men will stand side by side with these women. And in the West, if we sit with our arms folded around our chests while othering what is happening to the Afghan women, what does it say about us? What does it say to our daughters about what injustices we are willing to tolerate, accept, and peg as regional or cultural issues in order to make ourselves feel better so we can go back to our lives without feeling like we had something to do with the Afghanistan disaster? Thank you so much, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Humaira. A wonderful job as always. As everybody knows, the women progress in general in Afghanistan in the last 20 years has been is the highlight of the achievements in the progress in Afghanistan. So, and thank you to you, and thanks to all of the other women advocates who will continue to really represent and be the voice of women in Afghanistan. So thank you again. Now, next to our next distinguished panelist, Amy Dotson, who's the volunteer services manager at JFCS, Jewish Family Community Center here in the East Bay. And they have done a terrific job. They've been a great partner with many for a long time. So we want to welcome, and Amy, with that, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to the Commonwealth for hosting this and for inviting me to speak. It's an honor to be here. So I'm, as Ata said, I'm the Volunteer Services Manager at JFCS East Bay. We are a local refugee resettlement agency, and we've actually been operating since 1877. So we have 144 years of experience resettling refugees in the East Bay. We've been specifically resettling Afghans since about 2008. So we were very well positioned when the current crisis happened to really be a force on the ground for helping people resettle in the Bay Area. JFCS is an affiliate of HIAS, the Hebrew International Aid Society. So we are one of the 16 nationwide affiliates from HIAS. They're the national organization that contracts with the federal government and the Office of Refugee Resettlement, and the conduit through which our clients come to us. So we've been busy. We were busy before the current crisis, and we've been very busy lately. In the month of August, JFCS resettled 80 Afghan individuals and also a family of 6 from Burma. So 86 individuals in the month of August alone. We have resettled about 20 people so far in September, and we have 33 more in our pipeline that we're expecting imminently. Just to put that into context, pre this current crisis, JFCS would typically resettle around 130 people a year. So in a 6-month period, we might do 65, 70 people. So 80 people in 1 month is more than 6 months worth of a normal schedule for us. So it's been busy. We operate on the federal fiscal year. So that means we're about to begin FY22. So that's October 1st, 2021 through September 30th of 2022. Pre-crisis, we were anticipating resettling 170 refugees globally and 120 specifically Afghan refugees for a total of 290 people. So we were already kind of expecting to double or triple the work that we normally do in a year. With the crisis of the last month, we expect that number to be even much, much higher. So who are these people? We primarily are resettling Afghan SIV holders. So an SIV is a special immigrant visa. Afghans who aided or worked for the United States military during the last 20 years are eligible to apply for this special visa. So we're thinking, think about the translators and the drivers and the people on the ground, and even the janitorial staff at the US bases, right? Even those, people from all levels are eligible for this visa because they are being targeted by the Taliban. So the normal process for receiving an SIV usually takes about 2 years for the vetting process to go through. The government is expediting that as quickly as they can, but there are still a lot of people who are eligible for an SIV and therefore at risk of retribution from the Taliban. And those people are now being classified as humanitarian parolees. And you may have seen or heard that term in the news, parolees. So the humanitarian parolees it's an entirely different project in terms of resettlement than the SIV holders. And we are expecting between now and March 31st of next year, we've agreed to resettle 100 or more parolees. And that's in addition to all of the SIV holders that we and their families that we'll be resettling. The SIVs SIV refugees are eligible for all social services, Medi-Cal, CalFresh, and they also receive resettlement funds from the federal government. The parolees get none of that. They are, they're not eligible for a lot of the same benefits, and they don't receive cash assistance. So we have been, as an agency, working very hard to make sure that we are ready for all of these people and that we can support them and meet all of their needs. The Bay Area is highly impacted because there's such a vibrant Afghan community here already. We try to resettle people where they have a US tie, where they have family members and friends and a community to engage with. So in the Bay Area, in the East Bay, that's mostly Concord, Hayward, and Fremont. Most of the clients that we are resettling are going to Concord or Hayward. And from what I hear, there are still lots and lots of SIV holders still trapped in Afghanistan. One of the other panelists might have a better idea of the exact number. I've heard anywhere from 1,000 to 10,000. Nobody seems to know exactly, but there are certainly lots of people still trapped inside Afghanistan, trying to get out, and who are eligible to leave, right? Who are eligible for these visas and entitled to come to the United States. In terms of what JFCS does, we're not involved in getting people out of the country, right? That happens on a federal level and a little higher, but we as soon as their plane touches the ground, that's when we leap into action. So our federal contracts have they require very specific services. And that's everything from meeting a family at the airport to making sure they have a culturally appropriate hot meal ready for them when they arrive, to signing them up for all of the benefits they're entitled to, and offering thorough and comprehensive case management for the 90 days of their resettlement and placement period. So a family is assigned a case manager. That case manager works with them very closely for the first 90 days they are here. And then usually by the end of those 90 days, the family is ready to be a little bit more self-sufficient. If not, if there's a family that needs more support, we do have another program that we can enroll people into that provides case management, intensive case management service for an additional year. And that's generally for people who maybe have high medical needs or have a different set of needs that takes them beyond the 90-day resettlement period. So the case managers do a lot in those first 90 days, but we also have an amazing team of volunteers, and that's my piece. As the volunteer services manager, I oversee all of the volunteers that we have working with the agency. Pre-crisis, we had about 400 volunteers working with us in all kinds of capacities. In the last month, we have had more than 3,300 people sign up to volunteer. So it's been overwhelming. It's been wonderful, wonderful and heartwarming, and a little overwhelming. So if you're watching this and thinking, I signed up to volunteer and I never heard anything back, we'll get to you eventually. we're awfully awfully backlogged. But it's been such a privilege to be in this position. We get to see this amazing outpouring of support from our East Bay community. It's been beautiful to witness, honestly. So we are doing our best to connect volunteers with clients and find, things for these volunteers to do. I mean, I'll be honest, I don't really have 3,000 volunteer jobs, but we're trying to engage as many people as we possibly can. So if you're wondering, what you can do to get involved, certainly fill out our volunteer form and join the list of 3,348 as of this morning. And then we're also operating an Amazon wish list. And if you want to do something today, that's really the best way to help. We provide a lot. The agency provides all kinds of goods and services for our clients. So once a client has been moved into housing, we help them find an apartment. We help them find a cosigner for their lease, and then we furnish their apartments. They get everything from toothbrushes to toasters, to beds and everything, and we provide all of that. Some of that is through funding, but a lot of that is through our volunteer community. We run a very robust in-kind donations program. So every piece of furniture that we put in a client's apartment most of it has been donated. And we also provide all kinds of housewares. So the furniture is covered for the moment, but we're still in need of things like dish sets and sponges and shampoo. So that's all on the Amazon wish list, and we curate that multiple times a day so that it's always reflecting our most current needs. So if you want to know, what does a family that arrived yesterday need today, it'll be on that list. I have lots more that I could go on and on, but I think I'll turn it back to Ata now, and I'll look forward, I hope, to a lot of questions during the Q&A. There's a lot more I can say about specific volunteer opportunities and specifics on how the agency operates in refugee resettlement. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Amy, for the wonderful job your organization does. It's amazing that you have such a credible history of service, and we appreciate it. And obviously the list of over thousands of people volunteering, that speaks volume, and the respect that your organization has. And in the meantime, as I said the other day, and we mentioned over the phone to you, we will hopefully cooperate with our organizations to actually make the best of these volunteers and the work that goes around. So thank you again, Amy. And let's now welcome Steve Miska, who is a retired colonel. He is the author of Baghdad's Underground Railroad. Steve has done a phenomenal job of helping out interpreters, refugees, and SIVs. And I think there is a lot more that what I've gathered so far. So Steve, we really appreciate you being here, and please share your experience and what's really happening in this critical time. On to you, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you, Ata. And I just want to say it's an honor to join Amara and Amy on this panel today. I first got involved with SIVs when I was in Baghdad in 2006 and 2007, and my interpreters started being killed out from underneath me. I spent about 40 months on the ground in Iraq. And so I came back to Washington, D.C. with this burning issue of why we as a country were not doing a good job of protecting and insulating our closest Iraqi, Afghan, Somali, Yemeni, wherever we happen to be in a conflict zone. Why were we not doing a better job of protecting them? And so I've spent a lot of time in this space thinking about it, publishing, writing, as once the president made the decision to withdraw, I was asked to join a coalition of nonprofits, mainly based out of Washington, D.C., but not primarily. Organizations like the International Refugee Assistance Project does pro bono legal support in New York City. But Human Rights First was leading this charge through a program called Veterans for American Ideals. And I've been a member for quite some time. And so we started advocating to the administration not to let this become a crisis, to get ahead of it and begin evacuating the most vulnerable Afghan partners beforehand. As what I would call a train wreck was approaching, we quickly realized that it wasn't going to turn out well. And so the veteran community, thousands of veterans, are active and engaged right now, even. We haven't given up in looking for solutions to help find safe passage for vulnerable Afghans and not just special immigrant visa holders, of which, by mid-August, there were 20,000 principal applicants, but when you factor in their family members, you're talking a population of about 80,000 people. But when you look at the defense contracting community that basically was pulled out with the US military and NATO partners, you're talking tens of thousands, and I've heard orders of magnitude greater in terms of people who are highly at risk. And so I apologize to everybody because I haven't gotten a lot of sleep in the last month after this debacle began unraveling. And I've spent almost the entire time in Los Angeles at the Pacific Council on International Policy. They basically gave us their entire office suite to run a 24/7 operations center to help not just Afghans get out, or to help coordinate operations on the ground in Afghanistan, but also to look at the entire evacuation pipeline from Afghanistan to third countries, whether they're the government third countries where the US evacuated people to, or others where people were fortunate enough to get taken by veterans and other organizations that were able to get people out. Those efforts continue to this day. They involve, and we also, as I complete the picture of the pipeline, we're also covering the 8 military bases in the United States, where there's a population of about 40,000 Afghans. All of the SIV applicants, American citizens and legal permanent residents have been allowed to pass through and move on to wherever their destinations were supposed to be. But the remaining population is in either a P2 category visa or some other form of visa. And as Amy mentioned, the reason they were able to be brought into the United States was via humanitarian parole, which does not afford a legal status to them at all. It's basically legal limbo until such time as the government figures out how to give them a status, which then could potentially afford them many of the benefits that Amy was talking about. So anyway, we look at the entire pipeline, and what we do is we help connect organizations like Amy's organization to maybe nonprofits who operate in the San Francisco area. Miri's List comes to mind, where she complements government resettlement agencies and other organizations. She's got offices in now, I think, 21 different states, but started in Los Angeles to welcome vulnerable refugees coming in. And what we do is we just try to, with this operations center, we operate on two principles. The first one is humility, that the idea that somebody 9,000 miles away can tell a family what to do in Kabul right now is not the smartest thing. As me speaking as an operator, somebody being on the ground. But what we do is we provide them the information, the best information we possibly can to help them weigh their individual risks and make the decisions for themselves. And we also try to connect them with resources on the ground that can help. So for example, digital hygiene. The first thing that happens if the Taliban detain you is they open up your phone and they start checking your social media profiles, your Google searches, stuff like that, to determine whether or not you have a Western affiliation or what other sorts of affiliations you have. So we help with tools like how to clean up your profiles so that it makes it more difficult, how to avoid biometric checks, which unfortunately the Taliban now have by virtue of us training the Afghan National Security Forces on how to use biometric equipment. So we do things like that, as well as help people get to safe houses. And then in many cases, we will never not answer the phone, but we don't have the capacity to handle the tens of thousands of requests that come in. And so what we attempt to do is refer people to the organizations that we know are working on whatever problem they happen to have at the time. And so the first principle is humility, but the second one is empathy. It's our operators always pick up the phone seeking to understand the person on the other end, whether they're in Afghanistan or they're stressed out here in the United States, worried about somebody in Afghanistan, or they can't find somebody who was evacuated, but they're stuck in Doha in Qatar somewhere, and they're just trying to get a message to their loved ones. So our operators will always respond, but I will tell you the demand has been completely off the hook, and it's been extremely challenging. I will, on a personal note, this whole experience over the last month was more difficult for me than spending 16 months in Baghdad at the height of sectarian cleansing. It's been really brutal. And the thing that is heartening to me is that I work alongside so many humanitarian partners like Umera and Amy. I work alongside so many veterans that refuse to give up and that will continue to honor our ethos, which was inculcated in us in our time of service of leave nobody behind. And our government, thankfully, has recognized that these communities will not stop. And they are now working to coordinate more closely with us to at least not interfere with the efforts that are going on and hopefully synchronize them a little bit better. And our organizations are directly in contact with members of Congress as well as senior members of the government to make sure we align those interests better and continue working to safeguard our closest Afghan partners. So I'll leave it there, Ada, and I also look forward to any questions the audience might have.
Thank you very much, Steve, and really for your service, sir, and for all of the work you do, just quality work and to add value and make a difference in lives of others. So we do appreciate it. I want to remind everybody in our streaming audience that today's program is coordinated by Middle East Commonwealth Club's Middle East led forum. So we have lots of questions, and why don't we start with the one involving Afghan people. So Humera, if I can, maybe you can start to comment on this. And the question is whether, in light of all of course, the corruptions and the things that people are familiar with and heard, the question is whether, are there Afghans in Afghanistan, or what majority of the Afghans have been happy with US and international presence in cooperation?
So is the question, are there any Afghans who've been happy with the past 20 years or in the past
The
couple?
past 20 years. I believe that's the question, is actually points to the presence of US and NATO forces. So that's, I believe, the big question as to what percentage of people, maybe, how about the reaction from people inside Afghanistan?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer in the sense that the Afghan people, first of all, have no qualms with the American people. Afghans actually love Americans. And when I went back to Afghanistan as an Afghan American, I got double love, both as an Afghan and as an American. So I just want to make that clear. As far as the Afghans are concerned, they're very pragmatic people and they're not blind. I mean, of course, they've seen the work that the US, especially the servicemen and women who have done around community building, around building schools, providing support to women, to men, to a lot of the local projects that were being done. For example, I was in a forward operating base in Ghazni, and I was just blown away by how compassionate our servicemen and women were about their work and how they did the local projects through the provincial reconstructions teams with so much care and respect for the Afghan people. I think the issue that the Afghans have had is the lack of strategy on the U.S. involvement in Afghanistan. You know, we went in 2001 after Al-Qaeda forces that attacked the United States in 9/11, and then there was a lot of promises made to the Afghans, but then just a few years later, we pulled out all of our forces and then sent it to Iraq, and that was basically when the power vacuum was created and the Taliban resurgence happened. One of the other things, and that has happened over and over, and as we have also learned through the Afghanistan papers that the Washington Post released, there were a lot of efforts that were being made, both military as well as intelligence and through the State Department and such, that were counter to what worked in Afghanistan. There wasn't any really local knowledge. The US did, and this is not a conspiracy, everybody knows it, worked with a lot of warlords, paid them for intelligence. So that created its own power structures within Afghanistan that has worked counter to what the mission in for the US forces were. So there's been a lot of confusion, mix-up, and lack of strategy that has affected the Afghan people directly, especially with drone attacks and searches of people's homes and a variety of different tactical things that were happening in Afghanistan that was not really in line with Afghan culture, and there was a lot of death with Afghan civilians. So there isn't one answer to this. I think that Afghans recognize a lot of what was done as far as creating the Afghan constitution, recreating a whole finance system, women's rights, human rights, but they also realized that on the military side, there were just a lot of things that weren't executed well, and it caused a lot of deaths. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, that's excellent. Now, obviously, there are a lot of questions that we're getting here, but some of them, let me just combine a couple here, and that will be directed to Steve, if you will kindly comment on this. There have been questions that there are a lot of approved processes or SIVs that have been approved, but there are still people on the ground or in Afghanistan And what are you hearing as to what are the opportunities for these people and how can they get out to make it out of Afghanistan?
Yeah, so currently we haven't seen a lot of movement with special immigrant visa applicants with respect to the flights that some people may have seen. Some limited flights have mainly been foreign passport holders being allowed to leave. But those negotiations, I believe, are still ongoing, and it remains to be seen. And this was what has been so hard to communicate to people on the ground. I mean, for Afghans, the evacuation was essentially over when the bomb hit the airport. It was almost impossible to get somebody into the airport in Kabul after that. And all of the other airports had already fallen to the Taliban. So Kabul was it. It was the only place to go. And so for several weeks now, we've been attempting to see what normal would look like under the Taliban with a return to commercial air traffic. And we're starting to see some of that. They've outsourced it to the Qataris with respect to air traffic control. And I think it's too early to tell, specifically with respect to special immigrant visa holders and other at-risk categories, what the challenges are going to be. And the two categories in particular that I distinguish between, if somebody has a passport and visa, that's a huge advantage over having to go to a Taliban-controlled ministry to get that now. And so depending on where people are in every case is individual, I can't really give a better answer than that.
Thank you. No, totally understandable. Thank you very much. The next question will be to Amy. Amy, do you have any idea from U.S. standpoint as to how many refugees or the new arrivals are, how are they allocating these folks over to the regions, and especially in this region? Do you know what we can anticipate in Northern California?
Yeah, absolutely. On a national level, California actually receives about a third, usually a little bit more, usually like 35% of the nation's overall refugees. So of the entire body of people that are coming into this country, about a third of them come to California. A lot of them get resettled in Southern California, but there are multiple resettlement agencies in Northern California. I mean, there's us here in the East Bay. We also have an affiliate in San Francisco, and the International Rescue Committee, IRC, has offices in Oakland and San Jose, and I believe Sacramento as well. There's a lot of people going to Sacramento. In terms of actual numbers, I don't know off the top of my head. It's in the thousands. I mean, there are lots and lots of people who will be coming to Northern California. Things have slowed down a little bit because of some of the public health outbreaks at Fort Lee and some of the other places where people have gotten to America. And I think there was a measles outbreak. And so they aren't putting people on planes to their final destinations quite as quickly. So we've seen a little bit of a slowdown just in the last week, but we are expecting that to ramp up again very quickly. And in fact, actually just this morning, I got an alert from our system saying that there's 2 new families have been approved and are coming tomorrow. Thank
you, Amy. Appreciate that. So now we have only a few more minutes, but I hope we'll have future opportunities to expand. But now this question, actually, if you could all, 3 of you, if you could just comment based on your understanding of what's happening. The question is from several audiences. What do you think? What does it hold for Afghanistan? What does the future hold? If you could just briefly comment, starting with Humaira, that would be great.
Well, on the short term, I see a humanitarian disaster looming just around the corner with winter coming and the economy not having any cash to go through and pay the employees for people to be able to withdraw the funds that they have. I want to make sure that people know that the $9.5 billion is Afghanistan's money. This is not aid money. This is money that was held in New York Reserve as part of the structure of the Afghan finance system that was created. And to be honest with you, that's as far as I can think about the future of Afghanistan, is what is going to happen to the people. I don't see the Taliban going anywhere. And although I am definitely not a fan of theirs, I feel like we need to start finding a way to work with them.
Thank you, Mara. Steve?
I would echo Amara's comments. I do think, and I think our government understands that there is a need to figure out what working with the Taliban looks like and attempting to mitigate the humanitarian crisis, which is playing out right now, quite frankly. And it will only get worse as the winter season comes. We've seen infighting within the Taliban, and we should expect to see more of that. I would be reluctant to advocate to attempt to take advantage of that. I think as a country, we don't exercise enough humility in our foreign policy, and we really need to focus on the humanitarian fallout from this withdrawal and attempt to alleviate that through not just our own resources, but our leadership in the international community to help bring other countries to the table, along with UNHCR and others, so that we can mitigate it to the extent that we can.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Amy?
Thank you. It's a great question. I don't know that I'm the best person to answer for the future of Afghanistan, but what I will say is that for the future of the people that are coming here and that are making it here, they're arriving with a lot of trauma. And I think, what we can do as a community here in the West is be very sensitive to that trauma and be very empathetic and compassionate and really think about how we as a community can make this the most welcoming place possible for these people who are coming here, who have been really traumatized by a situation completely out of their control.
Thank you. I mean, that's exactly what we're hearing all over as we are in touch, as the Humaira and other advocates are all aware. We're hearing some incredible stories. I mean, it's really, really amazing as to what's happening throughout as these refugees are sent, and some mostly in state of shock, chaos, and you're absolutely right. It is very difficult situation. And again, we'll really hope to have opportunities to expand, and we'll have you all in the future to expand and share more experiences. But we want to thank you, Humaira, Steve, and Amy, for a wonderful job today, and again, for your cooperation and all of what you do. And in the meantime, wish we had more time, but we don't. We want to let you know that we really too appreciate everybody, of course, all of the audiences throughout for listening and tuning in today to Commonwealth Club's program, celebrating 117 years of enlightened conversations. So again, we all appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. And with that, our program for today is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Ada.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor and a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.